Welcome to On Strike, a production of Workers Strike Back. I'm Kshama Sawant. On Friday, July 18th, the United States Congress approved a bill to send hundreds of billions of dollars more to support the Israeli state's genocidal mission in Gaza. Hundreds of billions more dollars to continue the unspeakable horrors being perpetrated on the Palestinian people, nearly 500,000 of whom have already lost their lives in the genocide. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC as she's called, voted no on an amendment to the bill that called for eliminating $500 million for Iron Dome, Arrow, and David Sling, all of which are weapons in the Israeli arsenal against Gaza. In other words, she voted to fund the genocide. Working people and the left have correctly been horrified by AOC's vote and are rejecting her attempt to justify this utterly reprehensible action. In this episode, we will talk about AOC's record and the record of her fellow progressive Democrats on the issue of the genocide and the brutal occupation by Israel of the Palestinian lands. We will talk about what is needed to end the genocide, and we will talk about the kind of political representation that's needed urgently for the anti-war movement. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to On Strike if you haven't already done so. If you've been watching On Strike, you know that we bring coverage, political analysis, and strategy for the working class of the kind you simply won't find in the mainstream media. Become a member of Workers Strike Back to help ensure we can continue to build our movement against the billionaires and their political servants. And so that On Strike can continue to bring the kind of discussions about strategy needed to fight back and win. We don't run any ads, we don't accept any corporate money, and we rely on donations from working people like you. Go to workersstrikeback.org and click on Become a Member. The Israeli state, with the full and unconditional backing of Western imperialism, has transformed Gaza into hell on earth for the Palestinian people, as the president of the International Committee for the Red Cross commented after her recent visit to Gaza, several weeks into Israel's ongoing total blockade on humanitarian aid. More than 90% of Gaza's housing has been destroyed. The entire population is experiencing the onset of famine. Estimates from the British medical journal, The Lancet, indicate the Gaza death toll was likely over 335,000 by September of last year, and that the toll has likely since surpassed 400,000. The fact that most corporate media publish around a tenth of that actual number is not only glaringly inaccurate, it's nothing less than genocide denial. UNICEF Executive Director Catherine Russell said earlier this month, quote, "Each of Gaza's 1 million children has faced immense suffering. An average of 28 children have been killed each day, the equivalent of an entire classroom. Consider that for a moment, a whole classroom of children killed every day for nearly 2 years. These children are not combatants. They are being killed and maimed as they line up for life-saving food and medicine." End quote. That average over recent months has grown far worse. At least 100 Gazan children are being injured or killed daily since Israel resumed its genocidal offensive in March. More than 9,000 children have been treated for malnutrition already this year, and the latest estimates are that 1 in 5 children is malnourished. Just days ago in northern Gaza, for example, as reported by UNICEF, Wad and her husband Masood watched helplessly as severe acute malnutrition claimed the lives of their newborn twins. "We lost our twin babies after birth because of malnutrition. I can't lose Ibrahim and Muhammad too," Masood said about their surviving 2 children. To quote one of the relief and aid workers on the ground, "People in Gaza are neither dead nor alive, they are walking corpses." And as a young Palestinian student, Taqwa Al-Wawi wrote in an essay, "Let me be clear, the people of Gaza are being starved on purpose. We are not unlucky, we are victims of war crimes." This is the context in which AOC voted no on the amendment to cut $500 million of US funding to the Israeli military. It is the same context in which she has stated that Israel has a right to defend itself. This is not defense, this is a Holocaust. AOC's vote for those $500 million for Israel is inexcusable and amounts to support for the genocide in Gaza. And except for a small number of representatives like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, who voted for the amendment, the same goes for the rest of AOC's fellow rotten self-described progressives in the Democratic Party who have also voted for Israeli military funding, including Pramila Jayapal and Ro Khanna. AOC's gaslighting attempts at justifying her action exposes her even further. She admits Israel is committing a genocide, as you can plainly see in her tweet, yet she apparently thinks working people are stupid enough not to see through her claim that funding for Israel's Iron Dome is acceptable because it's a defensive weapon. No aspect of this genocidal project can be considered defensive. Iron Dome, Arrow, David Sling, all funded by those $500 million, are part of the genocidal hardware of the Israeli state. They have allowed Israel to carry out slaughter in Gaza with impunity. They have also enabled Israel to brutally attack Lebanon, Iran, Syria, and Yemen. Israel has bombed Yemen on 9 separate occasions just since May of this year, so many times that there is a separate Wikipedia page for Israel's attacks on Yemen just since May. There is nothing defensive or defensible about any of this. These ongoing horrors would be impossible without the hundreds of billions of dollars of military funding from the US ruling class and its two parties, Democrats and Republicans. It's good that the leadership of the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, publicly spoke in opposition to AOC's vote. It's also important that the national DSA leadership finally withdrew their endorsement of AOC last year over the issue of Israel and Gaza. But this is not enough. Moreover, the New York City DSA did not withdraw their endorsement. AOC's recent vote is not an isolated instance, but part of an overall record of her doing the bidding of the Zionists and the warmongers. On September 2021, AOC voted present on a bill to give $1 billion to Israel's Iron Dome, which is equivalent to abstaining on this critical vote and refusing to oppose it. In other words, she chose to stand on the sidelines as $1 billion in military aid went to a state that had been carrying out a shockingly brutal occupation of Palestinian lands for over 7 decades. The day after that vote, AOC publicly apologized to working people for not voting no on the $1 billion for Iron Dome. But in October 2023, while speaking to CNN Newsnight, AOC reversed her position again and said she thought Iron Dome was quote-unquote absolutely legitimate and that she would vote for it. All of last year, AOC uncritically backed Biden for president despite his administration arming Israel to the teeth. And then, at the Democratic National Convention in August, AOC loudly proclaimed that Kamala Harris was working, quote-unquote, tirelessly for a ceasefire in Gaza. It was patently obvious to anyone paying attention that the Biden-Harris administration was not only doing nothing to stop what has become a 21st century Holocaust, but that Biden-Harris, the Democrats, and the Republicans were all backing Israel to the hilt and giving lucrative contracts to the US weapons corporations. In fact, Jack Lew, Biden's ambassador to Israel, openly boasted about how the Biden-Harris administration never exerted any pressure on Israel to stop bombing Gaza. As he said, nothing that we ever said was just stop the war. In November of last year, AOC sided with the Anti-Defamation League, a powerful Israel lobby group, by voting yes on a disgusting resolution that equates criticism of the Israeli state to anti-Semitism, which is intended and will be wielded as a weapon of repression against the anti-war movement. While she is less blatant than the most open warmongers in her party, AOC's actions are a complete betrayal of working and oppressed people, only made worse by her calling herself a socialist. She is making sure that she votes enough on the side of US imperialism's agenda in the Middle East so as to signal to them that she is malleable for their interests. We cannot allow this. No politician who is voting to fund this genocide deserves one more working class vote. Ending the genocide and the brutal occupation will require building a powerful anti-war movement to defeat the forces of US imperialism in order to win an end to all military funding to Israel. That means mass strike action and mass protests and civil disobedience. It means elected leaders in the US Congress who will not only consistently vote against funding the genocide, but also use their office to mobilize an army of hundreds of thousands of working people to fight the Democratic and Republican parties, the Zionist lobby, and the billionaires profiting from war and genocide. Democrats like AOC are doing none of this. Voting the right way is the lowest possible bar, and AOC has repeatedly failed even to do that. As horrifying as it has been to see her go further and further in backing Israel, it's far from the only issue on which AOC has betrayed working people. AOC abandoned most of her program shortly after she first took office in 2019. In early 2021, when the Democratic Party had a majority in the US House, there was an opening for AOC and other progressive Democrats to build a fight for Medicare for All by withholding votes from arch corporate Democrat Nancy Pelosi, who needed their votes to become Speaker of the House. At the time, many, including myself, urged AOC and her fellow squad members, which included Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, to use their numerical balance of power as leverage against the Democratic establishment and withhold their support from Pelosi on the condition that there at least be a House vote on Medicare for All. In my view, a dogged billionaire representative like Pelosi should never get any progressive votes, but withholding their support from her to push for working class needs is the bare minimum any self-described socialist ought to have done. I also argued at the time that this force the vote tactic should not simply be an electoral mechanism within Congress, but it was crucial that it be paired with building a mass movement nationally for Medicare for All, to launch a real fight to win it, to organize the millions who supported it to carry out mass rallies and strike action and go all out. To organize, as we did with my Socialist City Council office in Seattle, to win historic victories. AOC and her fellow progressive Democrats refused to do any of this. One of the things AOC said at the time was that Medicare for All was too much of a reach and that she'd instead fight for the $15 minimum wage because it was more winnable. Shortly after that, she abandoned any fight for the $15 minimum wage also. The federal minimum wage is still at a shocking $7.25 per hour. In abandoning the chance to build a fight for Medicare for All, AOC was given thorough cover by the DSA leadership and many progressive commentators. They also bear responsibility for these betrayals of the working class. In November of 2022, AOC voted to break the railroad workers' strike. Many DSA leaders still continued running interference for her and other DSA elected Congress members who also voted to break the strike. The vote did spark a big crisis inside DSA and resulted in many members leaving the organization. AOC has abandoned working people and refused to fight for any of the demands she campaigned on because that would put her in conflict with the Democratic Party leadership, with people like Nancy Pelosi. In a few moments of honesty, AOC has revealed why she has abandoned the promises she made when she first ran for Congress. In 2021, after failing to vote no on Iron Dome, she said that she backed down because she was subjected to quote-unquote hateful targeting. In 2023, AOC was asked about how the right-wing MAGA Republican Congress members carried out a force-the-vote tactic, something she had claimed could not be done by progressive Democrats. At that time, AOC talked frankly about how, had she done that, it would have caused her, quote-unquote, reputational and relational harm with the power brokers in her party. Yes, the Democrats and the Republicans will make your daily life hellish if you decide to defy the agenda of the ruling class. They will use personalized nastiness, character assassination, social ostracizing, and psychological pressure to get you to back down. I have seen all of this firsthand in my decade on the Seattle City Council. Standing up to these attacks is far from easy. But here's the deal. There is absolutely no way not to sell out working people unless you do stand up to these kinds of attacks on you personally. This simply cannot be about your reputation or your relationships with the Democratic Party leaders or any other misleaders. In order for the working class to win, our leadership has to be clear that such attacks against you personally are really weapons against the working class. And it is not only the Democratic establishment who will use these weapons against you, it will also be much of the labor leadership who follow the ideas of business unionism, which means that they prefer not to have an all-out fight with the bosses, and they prefer to be tied to the Democratic Party, which is one of the parties of the bosses. These pressures exist everywhere, whether you get elected to City Hall or state legislature or Congress, or if you get elected as a labor leader, or if you emerge as a leader of a social movement. Wherever there is potential for a mass of the working class to get organized and defeat the billionaire class, there will be relentless attempts by the political establishment and their many gatekeepers to force the movement leaders to back down. So yes, it is your responsibility to stand up to them. And the way you do it is precisely by mobilizing and organizing that mass of working people that is so feared by the ruling class. AOC has decided to make her own life easier by making peace with the Democratic establishment. And by extension, this self-described democratic socialist has made her peace with the capitalist class, who are the ones really calling the shots. This has taken on comical dimensions at times. At one point, AOC affectionately called Nancy Pelosi Mama Bear.
You know, Nancy Pelosi, that's Mama Bear of the Democratic Party, you know.
And AOC is also undoubtedly angling for career opportunities, because that's the other part of the story. The ruling class will use both the carrot and the stick. The carrot to try and corrupt you, and when that doesn't work, they will use the stick to beat you down. You have to reject both the carrot and the stick and force them to back down through the pressure of organized movements. AOC has, in a certain sense, done us a favor by making it crystal clear that we cannot put our faith in progressive Democrats. It's not just about AOC. We have seen over and over again how the strategy of trying to make peace with the bosses and their parties never works. Zohran Mamdani's upset victory in the Democratic Party primary election for New York City mayor shows that Wall Street and the Zionist lobby can be defeated. Mamdani's victory was driven by his correct and relentless focus on working class demands. But in order to win these demands, Mamdani will need to build mass movements, not cozy up to the billionaire class. It's correct that many have raised concerns now, before Mamdani gets elected mayor, about his signs of going down the same road as AOC, of talking about wooing Democratic leaders like Governor Kathy Hochul, who is completely opposed to any taxes on the rich, or of meeting with 150 business leaders, including actual billionaires, behind closed doors. And it's not just about whether we can affect the political trajectory of Mamdani, it's about what working people need. And what we need urgently is a party of our own. This has been true for a very long time. The Democratic Party never represented working people. It was always a party of the capitalists. But its backing for the horrors in Gaza has exposed its nature to a new generation of young people. We can't support this party. We can't reform this party. It needs to go, and now is a time to fight for that, because it won't happen on its own. It will require ruthlessly exposing the party and its representatives for what they really are: careerists, misleaders, and betrayers of the working class. We need to stop supporting the Democratic Party altogether. We need to run our own independent candidates, accountable to working people and mass movements, as a step towards that new party. That's why I am running an anti-war, pro-worker campaign for the US Congress. If elected, I will use my congressional office exactly as I used my Seattle City Council office for a decade, to build mass movements of working and young people to win historic victories. I understood that, as a socialist, my role on the Seattle City Council was not to engage in cordial caucusing with the Democrats accept their pro-big business parameters, and keep the peace with them. Instead, I was clear that the Democratic politicians in City Hall represent big business and the wealthy, that my responsibility was to use my office to organize working people in the thousands and fight back against the billionaires and their political representatives in City Hall. Instead of submitting to the one-sided class war against working people by the two parties of the billionaire class, I recognized we needed to go to war ourselves. I understood from the beginning that my allies were not other politicians, they were ordinary working people wanting to fight. Like they did with AOC, the Democratic Party politicians and other leaders subjected me to hateful targeting. But unlike AOC, I did not back down in the face of the attacks against me. I worked with any labor or movement leader who was willing to fight alongside me, but I also realized that often these so-called leaders play the role of gatekeepers on behalf of the bosses. I understood that I had to mobilize ordinary working people, including the rank and file among union members, to overcome the pressures of the gatekeepers and the political establishment. With this understanding, my Socialist Council office organized movement after movement to win victory after victory. Our fighting strategy involved two crucial components. One was exposing individual Democratic politicians for their two-facedness and betrayals, and the other was defiant mass movements. When self-described progressive Democrats said, oh, we could not tax big business or establish a certain renters' rights law, they did not say, oh, I'm opposing this on behalf of big business or a corporate landlord. They would make up benign or innocent-sounding excuses such as, oh, we need more studies, or we need to bring stakeholders together, or, oh, I'm so worried about how this will affect small landlords, oh, we should not be divisive. Our fighting strategy meant publicly tearing these down as false excuses and saying that what they were doing is the bidding of the wealthy. It meant hundreds of people packing City Hall chambers and chanting and shutting down City Council meetings. It meant mass protests and rallies. That is how we won the nation's highest minimum wage, the Amazon tax to fund affordable housing, free abortion, the second and strongest ceasefire resolution in the country, and a renter's bill of rights that has been a lifeline for working class and poor families. This is the approach I will use if elected to the US Congress. I will go there not to make friends with Democratic or Republican politicians, operatives, or lobbyists, but to be a disruptor of the political peace. I will build a political army, as we did here in Seattle, to go all out to defeat the horrific bipartisan agenda of endless war, of genocide, and of a brutal class war against working people in the United States. If elected, I will go into the halls of Congress to expose the Democrats and Republicans and to help prepare the ground for a new party for working people. I will also be there to raise the profile of revolutionary socialist ideas and to build the revolutionary movement. This is precisely why the Democratic and Republican parties, the Zionist lobby, and the billionaire class will go all out to prevent me from getting elected, because they have seen what is possible when you have even one genuine socialist elected representative who not only doesn't cave under pressure, but who goes on the offensive. And this is why we need you, no matter where you live, to get active in our campaign. This is a national campaign which will have a seismic impact on US politics if we win. I am running an anti-genocide, pro-worker campaign for the US Congress against warmongering Democrat Adam Smith. I am calling for an end to all US military aid to Israel, an end to the occupations of Gaza and the West Bank, and I am also calling for free healthcare for all, funded by taxing the rich, and national rent control. Adam Smith has voted again and again and again to send military aid to Israel during his nearly 3-decade tenure. He has fully backed the genocide to the tune of tens of billions of dollars. He has been an absolutely reliable servant of the Zionist lobby. This is why Zionist lobby group AIPAC was Smith's #1 campaign donor last year. And it's why he has been bankrolled by war and genocide profiteers such as Lockheed Martin, Boeing, General Dynamics, RTX or Raytheon, Anduril, Northrop Grumman, Palantir, General Atomics, and Chimera. Smith has on his hands the blood of the nearly 500,000 Palestinians already killed in this genocide. He has demonized anti-genocide activists as extremists and left-wing fascists and called for them to be arrested. Smith has never met a war that he didn't like and has long been one of the most consistent warmongers among congressional Democrats. He holds the shameful distinction of being one of only 5 sitting Democratic representatives who voted for the Iraq War in 2002. Adam Smith needs to go. Join our campaign to bring down Adam Smith and elect an independent socialist to the US Congress. We have a historic opportunity and responsibility to fight to throw Adam Smith out of office. That is the absolute minimum price he should have to pay for his role in backing Israel for nearly 3 decades. Join our campaign at kshamasawant.org. The club of criminals backing this genocide encompasses virtually every politician in both Democratic and Republican parties, all of whom should not only be booted out of office, but also face prosecution for war crimes. That includes Adam Smith, but it also includes progressives like Pramila Jayapal, Ro Khanna, and AOC, who have voted to fund Israel's Iron Dome, Arrow, David Sling, and other genocidal hardware for Israel. Adam Smith's record is grotesque from every angle. He's complicit in the present famine. On April 20th, 2024, he voted for the bill that banned funding for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which paved the bloody road for Israel's current engineered famine in Gaza. That same bill gave over $26 billion in new military aid to Israel. The so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which was formed to replace the United Nations Relief and Works Agency and purportedly to deliver food and aid, is nothing less than genocidal gangsterism, an American-Israeli group that includes ex-CIA and military personnel that exists for the sole purpose of starving and murdering Palestinians. Some have called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation aid washing, where in reality, this pretense of aid is wholly designed to cover up its real agenda, the escalation of ethnic cleansing. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency chief, Felipe Lazzarini, also described the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation as a sadistic death trap, where Israeli snipers open fire randomly on crowds as if they are given a license to kill. In the less than 2 months since May, the Israeli state has massacred more than 1,000 Palestinians in Gaza while they were trying to get food for their families. According to the United Nations, most of those were mowed down while heading to sites run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundations. This has become a real-life Hunger Games-like horror show for the Palestinians. In other horrific news, an Associated Press study shows the systematic and widespread use of Palestinian people as human shields to examine areas for explosives. The study, which utilizes testimonials from former Israeli soldiers who are against the occupation, has found that this shockingly barbaric practice is being used in virtually every platoon of the Israeli military. The Israeli military refers to this practice as the mosquito protocol. Mosquito, like it's a bug that flies in the air and like you can kill it. Who cares about it? And that was the relationship a lot of times between the soldiers and those Palestinian individuals that were used. We should not be surprised by any of this. The whole ethnic cleansing project has always been an agenda that both Democrats and Republicans have backed for 75 years. And these two warmongering parties have been purveyors of endless brutal wars throughout their history. Democrats and Republicans in the US Congress spent more than $14 trillion on war since 9/11. A third to one half of this money is pocketed by military contractors who in turn fund the campaigns of their favorite Democrats and Republicans. The Israeli state would be able to carry out neither the genocide nor the brutal occupation of Palestinian lands for 3/4 of a century without the full political and military backing of the US. In fact, the creation of the State of Israel cannot be explained without understanding that it was a projection of the material interests of Western and specifically American and British capitalist and imperialist forces. It was they who pushed for the creation of Israel at the expense of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who were transformed overnight into landless and stateless refugees. The motivation for Western capitalism? Creating a strategic bulwark for their interests in the oil-rich Middle East, regardless of the human costs. Likewise, the current material and geopolitical interests of the US-led bloc against the China and Russia-led bloc are the major driver of US policy towards the Israeli state today. Much of the military funding to Israel results in a windfall of profits for US weapons manufacturers. From 2020 to 2024, it is estimated that private firms received $2.4 trillion worth of contracts from the Pentagon. Of these $2.4 trillion, $771 billion in Pentagon contracts went to just 5 firms: Lockheed Martin, RTX, Boeing, General Dynamics, and Northrop Grumman. Among the 5, Boeing averages at around 15% of all contracts by value, while RTX averages at around 19%. But there is a growing opposition to what has been taking place. The tide of international public opinion has turned very much against the Israeli state and the horrors they are carrying out with the backing of Western imperialism. We need to take this fight to the US Congress, which is why we need thousands of people to join our campaign. One of my last acts as a member of the Seattle City Council in November 2023 was to win the nation's second and strongest Gaza ceasefire resolution. How did we win that resolution? Did the Democrats on the City Council welcome it? No. They were completely opposed to it. Starting shortly after Israel's onslaught began in the fall of that year, we organized hundreds of people to build maximum pressure against the Democrats. The first time we brought our resolution to the council, the Democrats refused to even allow a vote on it. We kept organizing. We organized in the streets, online, through a petition, through mass mailings. We brought hundreds of people to City Hall to call out the Democrats and demand they pass our resolution. We built a stronger movement. There were self-described community leaders who played the role of gatekeepers on behalf of the Democratic Party. They had private meetings with the Democrats and then tried behind the scenes to force me to back down from the resolution. This is tragic, but it happens because in every community, there are those who put their connections with the Democratic Party ahead of the interests of people in their own communities. So my office and working people had to stand up against that in order to win. We built a united movement of working people across nationality, ethnicity, and religion. At the second City Council meeting, more than 500 people packed 2 floors of City Hall. Speaker after speaker in public comment defiantly demanded the Democrats vote yes on our resolution and expressed disgust at the Democrats for not supporting the resolution in the first place. And the Democrats were forced to vote yes. That is how you win victories, not by worrying about reputational and relational harm you personally will face at the hands of some powerful people, but by building a working-class army to fight against these powerful people every inch of the way. Unfortunately, these rotten politicians also put a series of loopholes in the resolution. The original resolution I put forward called not only for a ceasefire and slammed Israel for the atrocities it was carrying out, but it was also calling for an end to all US military aid for Israel and to the occupations of Gaza and the West Bank. The Democrats removed these last 2 points entirely. This is a lesson for us. What we can win or don't win is based on the strength of our movement versus our enemies. We don't win just because we have a morally correct position. We win when we organize a stronger force. When we make it clear that the price for the Democrats by voting against our movement could do real damage to their own political careers by exposing them as the sellouts that they are. It is that understanding, our ability to build fighting mass movements and withstand all the pressures against us, that allowed us to win again and again. We need to take that fighting movement-based strategy to the US Congress. If I'm elected, I pledge that one of my first acts will be to use the floor of the US Congress to expose all of those backing this genocide and to bring our movement to Washington, D.C. to go to war against both rotten parties of the billionaire class. I hope you will join us in this fight. Please like this video and subscribe to On Strike if you haven't already, and become a member of Workers Strike Back to help build this movement. Go to workerstrikeback.org and click on Become a Member. Solidarity.